Welcome back students for the next session of DP class. Name of the chapter is Power Sharing. In this session, we cover two topics. First one, why power sharing is needed, and two, different forms of power sharing. Before we start the lesson, let us recall what we have studied in the previous session. We have learned about the power sharing in two countries, Belgium and Sri Lanka. Because of the Belgian model, different communities, that is French, Dutch and German, lived happily there. Here you can see the board of a street address in Belgium in two languages, French and Dutch. But what happened in Sri Lanka? Because of the majoritarian policy of the government, Tamils were discriminated and it led to the civil war. See the picture here, how the Sri Lankan Tamils were coming to India as refugees. Many refugee camps were opened for them in India during the Sri Lankan civil war period. So we have understood that power sharing is very important. Now we will see why power sharing is very much desirable. There are two reasons for this. One is prudential reason and the second one is moral reason. First one, prudential reason. Because of power sharing, the possibility of conflict between social groups are avoided and in turn it leads to political stability. What do you mean by the term prudential? Prudential means based on the careful calculation of gains and losses. Second reason why power sharing is desirable is the moral reason. Basic spirit of democracy is sharing of power. Power should be shared with the people who are affected by the rule. Now we will see the different forms of power sharing. First one, power is shared among different organs of the government. That is power sharing among legislature, executive and judiciary. It is known as horizontal power sharing. Second is power shared among different levels of government. That is central, state and local governments. That is known as the vertical power sharing. Third form of power sharing is among different social groups, as in the case of Belgium. And the fourth one is power sharing among political parties, pressure groups, etc. Now we will see in detail. First form of power sharing is power sharing among organs of the government. Power is shared among different organs of government such as the legislature, executive and judiciary. We call this horizontal distribution of power because it allows different organs of government placed at the same level to exercise different powers. Such a separation ensures that none of the organs can exercise unlimited power. Each organ checks the others. This results in a balance of power among various institutions. Last year we studied that in a democracy, even though ministers and government officials exercise power, they are responsible to the parliament or state assemblies. Similarly, although the judges are appointed by the executive, they can check the functioning of executive or laws made by the legislatures. This arrangement is also called a system of checks and balances. Next form of power sharing is the vertical distribution of power. That power can be shared among governments at different levels. A general government for the entire country and governments at the provincial or regional level. Such a general government for the entire country is usually called federal government. In India, we refer to it as the central or union government. The governments at the provincial or regional level are called by different names in different countries. In India, we call them state governments. This system is not followed in all the countries. there are many countries where there are no provincial or state governments. But in those countries like ours, where there are different levels of governments, the constitution clearly lays down the powers of different levels of government. This is what they did in Belgium, but was refused in Sri Lanka. This is called federal division of power. The same principle can be extended to levels of government lower than the state government, such as the municipality and panchayat. Let us call division of powers involving higher and lower levels of government vertical division of power. The third type of power sharing is among different social groups, such as the religious and linguistic groups. Community government in Belgium is a good example of this arrangement. In some countries, there are constitutional and legal arrangements whereby socially weaker sections and women are represented in the legislatures and administration. Last year, we studied the system of reserved constituencies in assemblies and the parliament of our country. Do you remember that? This type of arrangement is meant to give space in the government and administration to diverse social groups who otherwise would feel alienated from the government. This method is used to give minority communities a fair share in power. And the last type of power sharing is the power sharing arrangements among political parties, pressure groups, and movements, etc. They control or influence those in either they involve in the ruling process or they control or influence those who are in power. In a democracy, the citizens must have freedom to choose among various contenders for power. In contemporary democracies, this takes the form of competition among different parties. Such competition ensures that power does not remain in one hand. In the long run, power is shared among different political parties that represent different ideologies and social groups. Sometimes this kind of sharing can be direct when two or more parties form an alliance to contest elections. If their alliance is elected, they form a coalition government and thus share power. In a democracy, we find interest groups such as those of traders, businessmen, industrialists, farmers, and industrial workers also. They also will have a share in governmental power either through participation in governmental committees or bringing influence on the decision-making process. Now, we will recall what we have studied in this lesson, power sharing. We saw power sharing is very important in democracy. Belgian model in Belgium we saw, and then majoritarianism in Sri Lanka. Belgium, where power is shared, witnessed a smooth functioning of the government. And in Sri Lanka, where power was not shared, faced problems like civil war. From the story of these two countries itself, we can come to a conclusion that power sharing is very important. Then we saw two reasons for power sharing. What are they? Prudential and moral reason. Then the different types of power sharing also we saw. Horizontal, that is power sharing among legislature, executive and judiciary. Then among the different levels of government, central, state and local governments. It is known as vertical power sharing. Then power sharing among different social groups. Lastly, we saw the sharing of power among political parties, pressure groups and movements. Thank you, students.